this is Mathew Jensen, who is Director of Programs at FaithInvest. Mathew has 2 decades of engaging institutional investors and consultants worldwide. His expertise include multi-asset global investing, product development and management, and consulting across global institutional markets. His background includes Chief Operating Officer for Liberty Cove Investors, Boston, US, Director of Research and Development for Fidelity Management and Research Company, also in Boston, US, and Investment Director for Wellington Management, again, Boston, US, and London, UK, though, this change. Mathew holds the Chartered Financial Analyst and Enterprise Risk Management Certified Professional certifications, a Master's in Business Administration from Cornell University and Queen's University, Canada, and a Bachelor of Science in Finance from Northeastern University. He is based in the US, and it won't surprise you to know, in the Great Boston area. I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Mathew.
I'm going to use this first. Are we good? Okay. It feels like a class. So I also teach at the undergraduate level as well. So yeah, we'll see if you get a coffee break or not. All right. So a little bit of different structure for this section. We're going to keep it lively. First, I'm going to take you through some research that we've recently updated on what faiths say they do with their investments. It's a study that we just put out called Good Intentions. Then we're going to have a little bit of a case study in how, and I heard some feedback, like it's really good to hear from smaller faith-based asset owners and how they do this. And we're going to do a little bit of a case study with a smaller faith-based asset owner that we've worked with over the last year or so on faith-consistent investing. How did they do it? And where are they today? And then we've got 2 questions for you. We're going to have you wrestle with 2 questions as roundtables and report back to the group. So we're going to try and keep it lively and moving, but we're really going to start getting nerdy now and digging into the how you implement as a faith-based asset owner your investments. So let me jump right in. And can you hear me through this thing? Okay. So for those of you who know FaithInvest, you've actually probably seen these slides before. I'm going to give you first a primer on faith-consistent investing. What is it? Where does it manifest? And then I'll get into our research. Where do we see it with faith-based asset owners? So faith-consistent investing, it's about intentionality, integration, and rooting all your investment decisions in your faith. You already have the materials as faith organizations to work with. You have your beliefs, your teachings, and values that you can translate into your investment decisions. And this is where they show up. These are sort of the 4 key pillars of investment governance. And in fact, I was just in an investment conference in Rome, and there was a Catholic asset manager there who said, look, if it's not in these 2 things, we're not going to do it. You have to capture it in your investment policy, in your guidelines. It must be stated clearly in these 2 things what you want us to do, because that's our instructions as an asset manager. And this is what we're going to focus on a little bit today. And then you have to make sure it's included in your governance process, your committees, your oversight, the people you have around the table that's overseeing your investment program. And then finally, you need to talk about it. How do you describe your activities as a faith-consistent investing organization internally? How do you describe it to your faithful? How do you talk about it externally? Church of England the Church Commissioners for England does, I think, an exceptional job on external communications. The stuff they've put out is fascinating, very transparent on what they do, but that's also an important part of how you oversee an investment program. So I've been with FaithInvest for 3 years, and about 2 years ago, we worked with a lot of individual faith-based asset owners. A lot of them were asking us, well, what does this organization do? What does that organization do? What do other Catholic organizations do? What do the Buddhists do? What do the Episcopals do? We're getting a lot of questions about what are common practices for faith-consistent investing among other organizations. So just for my own curiosity, I started looking at investment policies and guidelines from other faith-based asset owners. A lot of you put them online. They're publicly available. We can go out and Google them and collect them. And we just started sort of casually collecting a lot of investment policies and guidelines from faiths. And then we became more systematic about it. About 2 years ago, we started actually going out and seeking and asking for investment policies and guidelines, to the point now, as of today, we've over 100 investment policies and guidelines in our database, global, pan-faith, mega organizations, your small local church, everything in between. And we published a study, and we did a data cut on those investment policies and guidelines in 2021. We published our first version of this, what we called a good intention study, in spring of 2022, right? I think was our first version. Yeah. Super popular. People started sending it, faith organizations started sending us their investment policies and guidelines, saying, can you anonymously add these to your database? Can you score? How do we compare versus the other investment policies and guidelines you have? So we decided to update it again. So you can see in 2021, we had about 42. As of this cut, which we stopped in the spring, because we just published the paper about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had about 87, and now we're up over 100 since this came out. So we have this database of investment policies and guidelines from faiths. You can see how they break out by faiths, and you can see how they break out geographically. And we talk about this in the paper. Most of this is English. So we're missing huge swaths of faith organizations who don't publish their investment policies and guidelines in English. We need to fix that. We need to address that. But this is the database we have right now. And you can see a good chunk of them, especially between 2001 and our last cut, are in North America, followed by Europe, Asia, and Africa. So it gives you a sense of kind of the organizations we're looking at. We could do a breakout by size, which we probably should do. So now we have all these. We have a pile of investment policies and guidelines from faiths. Well, we published a paper in 2021, I think, Susie, from Faith Values to Investment, which is about how do you write a faith-consistent investment policy. And it goes step by step. And we broke it down into these 15 categories. I think that should be 15. These 15 categories. So for example, are you very clear in your investment policy that your faith has a role in how you invest? Right up front, we call it the front door. That's what we put a star on it. We want to see a very declarative statement. Our faith affects how we invest, and in these very specific ways. And all these other, is there a goal for that? Do you have negative screening? Do you have positive screening? Have you outlined your engagement and advocacy strategy, your investment policy and guideline, et cetera, all the way through to reporting, which we talked about earlier. Do you specify what you report and how you report on your faith-consistent investing? So that's the framework we set up, how you write a good investment policy and guideline. What we do now is I and the team read every single investment policy and guideline in our database, and these essentially become a yes-no question. Does this policy have a faith role? Does it have negative screening? Etc. All the way through. And with that, we can come up with a score. So if you have a yes, it's a 1. If you have a no, it's a 0. We can score them and then scale them on a 0 to 10 scale. So a 10 would mean if we come up with a score of 10, and there's a couple there in our database with it, perfect 10. They say yes, and they've got extensive details on all of these categories. If this isn't present, the rest of it doesn't matter. So that would automatically be a 0. And you'll see in a second how many, a number I was surprised by. So I obviously came to this space from an investment background, and I'd worked with faith organizations as an investor. And the organizations that I worked with were very value-centric. And so when I saw this result, 45% of all the investment policies and guidelines had no role for their faith in how they invest. That really surprised me. These are values-based organizations, preaching, doing good acts, communicating, shepherding. But then when it came to the money, no, it doesn't belong. Everything we do over here doesn't belong here in our money. So there's about 55% of those that we read that, yes, faith has a role. We've got some exceptional examples on how organizations describe that. And if you're interested, we can share them with you. 45% no role at all for their faith. So I'm not going to worry too much about this slide because the professor showed some pretty complex slides. But this, for you statistician, this is a histogram. This is a histogram. And so each bucket is a count. So let me give you an example. So a score of between 0 and 2. This is our FCI score. So these are organizations that either had no role for their faith or they had a role for their faith, but then they really didn't do anything else. You know, our faith affects how we invest. No other activity described in the investment policy and guideline. There's 44 organizations that fall into this bucket of no role to very minimal activity. And you can see there's a couple with a perfect, near perfect or perfect score. And the bulk are kind of, there's a good chunk in the middle. And we show you the overall average score. So this includes everybody who said, no, faith does not have a role, and everybody else. The average score, this is 0 to 10 scale, was a 3.1. And then the average score, the organization said, yes, faith has a role in what we do. They scored a 5.6. Pretty average. There's a lot more they could be doing. And let me give you a quick look at some of the categories. And you may be thinking about your own investment policy and guideline and saying, yep, we do that. Nope, we don't do that. So negative screening, very popular. Negative screening is we won't invest in tobacco stocks. We won't invest in XY stocks. That's negative screening. Very popular. Positive screening, somewhat popular. We are going to invest in climate solution companies. And some get very specific on that. And have you documented in your investment policy guideline what this criteria is? Some people say, yeah, we do negative screening, but then there's nothing else in the document about, well, what exactly negative are you doing? On engagement and proxy voting. So engagement, we've heard a lot of stories about engagement today. 60% do engagement. You know, that's, you're calling up the management, you're writing letters, you're working through an organization to work with a company to change some aspect of their behavior. Very popular. Proxy voting, I was really surprised by this. Maybe one of the more simpler things you can do as overseeing an investment program is to vote your proxies. But you'll hear a little later, one of the interesting dynamics here is if you've outsourced your investment management to an investment manager, you've probably outsourced your proxy voting to that investment manager as well, and they're voting it however they want to vote it. That's an area for work, and that's something we're focused on as well. Last thing I'm going to cover, we've talked a lot about impact today. Impact investing. Right, investing for specific outcomes. And of all those policies and guidelines we read, about 36% have an explicit allocation. Well, I shouldn't say allocation. Have an explicit allowance for impact investing. 64% do not. Of that 36%, as we kind of go through portfolios and we're working with organizations, it's actually a much smaller percentage than that who actually do it. So there's a big gap between that's aspiration and actually implementation in the portfolio on impact. So a huge opportunity there for growth on impact. And look at this. If you're one of those 45% who have no role for your faith in how you invest, there's no way you're going to do impact investing. So this is just looking at the 45% who said, no, faith does not have a role. Only 5% of them allowed any impact investing in their portfolio. So oftentimes when I'm talking to impact managers, in fact, oftentimes when I'm talking to any asset manager, I say get whoever you're going to go see, get their investment policy and guideline. Read it, understand it. If you're trying to raise money for an impact portfolio and you're reading a guideline that has no role for faith, you might be wasting your time with that organization. They're probably not going to do it. That's something we at FaithInvest are working on. So now when we start working with organizations one-on-one, that's our research that we do, our general research that we do. And then we oftentimes work with organizations on an individual basis to, well, bring their score up on FCI. And oftentimes, and I know some of you have gone through this, there's this tension. We have our faith aspirations clearly stated in everything about our faith, and then we collide with the marketplace with those faith aspirations. And we really can't do this, we can't do that, that's too expensive. The marketplace starts giving you some feedback. No, that's not possible. And so we talk about this aspirational and pragmatic trade-offs, this journey you take as a faith asset owner, where if you haven't done it before, you're one of the 45%, and now all of a sudden you're inserting, we have faith values we want to achieve. It comes up against all these other dynamics you're dealing with as a plan sponsor. You have we've heard about them today, return expectations, liquidity requirements. You know, we're going to be doing a big building project next year. We need that cash available. You have risk requirements. You have your size. That's a big, that can be a big trade-off. And then you have expense considerations as well. So you now need to fit this faith values into this whole picture that you're putting together. And now it starts to feel like, wow, this is getting a little complicated, and wow, now we need to start making some decisions about trade-offs. We may have a value we want to pursue. Maybe we can only do it through impact investing, but you know what? Because impact investing is very liquid and rather expensive right now, we can't do it. That goes on our wish list. And we're going to keep track of that, and we're going to come back to that in the future.